Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Esther Letterman, Director of Communities of Practice at the Union for Reform Judaism. And as part of our work with small groups with meeting community of practice, I am going to be, we are so delighted that we have Greg Marcus, a member of Beth Am in Los Altos Hills, California, who is going to be leading us on a session of Mussar. I'm going to read to you a little bit of Greg's bio and talk a little bit about why we invited him to be on with us today. So Greg Marcus is an innovative Mussar maven and the creator of American Mussar, a 21st century spiritual practice for an authentic and meaningful life. He's a graduate of the Mussar Institute's Facilitator training program and has been practicing and teaching for 5 years. Greg offers guidance on how to lead a life of mindful harmony and spiritual integrity, drawing upon Jewish teachings and contemporary wisdom alike. He has a PhD from MIT and worked for 10 years as a marketer in Silicon Valley. Greg's writing has appeared in the Forward and Tikkun.org and is the author of 2 books. His latest book, The Spiritual Practice of Good Actions, Finding Balance Through the Soul Traits of Mussar, has been praised by Alan Marinis, Rabbis David Jaffe, Ira Stone, and Sheffa Gold, as well as filmmaker Tiffany Schlane. The book grew out of a class he created at Congregation Beth Am in Los Altos, where he is a board member and co-chair of the Small Groups Initiative with Rabbi Heath Wattenmaker. Today, he is a writer, speaker, workshop facilitator, and stay-at-home dad to 2 teenage daughters. He created the Mussar Parenting to help him cope. Good to know. I'm not the parent of 2 teenage daughters. I have toddlers, and I feel like I need Mussar to cope. And the context for this is really, we've been working with a number of congregations for over a year now on small group engagement, in which, lay leaders get into small groups with each other and really form these incredible bonds. And Mussar is a potential connective tissue, sort of some of the Jewish content that allow these small groups to thrive. And we invited Greg to teach us some of the material he's put together on how to use Mussar specifically in small groups. So we're going to get a taste of that. And we're just really excited you could be with us today, Greg. Really appreciate you lending us your Torah and your wisdom. So I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Esther. I really appreciate being here. I'm going to start sharing my screen now so we can get this out of the way. Let's see, and there we are. Okay, so you should see the great URJ logo. So before we dive into Mussar, a couple of things for context. So the way this is going to be structured is first, I'm going to explain a little bit about Mussar just so we're all on the same page about what it is. And then we're going to share an experience of Mussar. So we'll like you to be unmuted and you'll have an opportunity to participate, and then we'll break out, and part of that will break out into pairs for some Havruta study. And after our experience in Mussar, we'll get together again and I'll kind of deconstruct the process and you can see how the overall Mussar curriculum works. Now I'd like you to, okay, so any questions about that first of all? Good? We all set? Excellent. All right, so I'd like you to stop and just for a minute, just imagine what would your life be like if every day you were the best part of a stranger's day? What would it mean if you were more patient with your spouse or with your kids or with your friends and didn't blow up at them? And when you did, you got over it pretty quickly. And now wearing your institutional hat, what would it mean if people in your synagogue started to see you as a place that could teach them to have these skills? Well, the kind of person that I'm describing is a mensch, a person of outstanding character. Really good news. Each and every one of us has what it takes to be a mensch. All we need is a manual, and Mussar is that manual. And for those of us who are part of the Jewish community and part of Jewish institutions, we have the opportunity to turn our institutions into mensch factories. What do you think about that? Do you think people would be excited to go to synagogue and be a part of something which could make their lives better? I think a lot of people are hungry for that. People have started to form, and we're all part of the Small Groups Initiative because we know that by creating community, That helps our congregants' lives, it helps our institutions, and Mussar is one of the arrows in the quiver that can help us accomplish that. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Mussar at Your Fingertips small groups curriculum. As a reminder, Mussar is a 1,000-year-old Jewish spiritual practice. It came at a time when the rabbis were asking themselves, why is it so hard for people to be good? You know, we have the mitzvot, they're laid out in the Torah, but they were starting to realize, well, people were having a hard time following those practices. And books started being written like Duties of the Heart, which started to look internally. What are those things inside us that hold us back and keep us from becoming a match, keep us from being our best selves? And so one of the ideas of Mussar is internally we have soul traits or midot. Those are, you can think of as our values and beliefs, and depending on what our internal balance is, that'll shape our priorities and lead to decisions and actions. And when we take action, that again influences our internal world. And depending on the kinds of choices we're making, we can be in a virtuous cycle or a not so virtuous cycle. There's a key concept in Mussar called a choice point, or the Hebrew for that is a behira point. So the idea is that within all of us, we have this battle between the good inclination and the evil inclination. And as we go through our life, sometimes we're just always going to do the right thing. And so you can think of that as kind of the left side of the river here. We're going to stop at the stop sign. We don't even think about it. But in other parts of our lives, you know, we're just in some bad habits, and we're going to be, you know, we're just going to read the paper when our kids are talking to us, or we're just going to be sitting texting during dinner, and we don't think about that either. But at that area in the middle, that's where our free will comes into place, and it's a very nebulous and shifting boundary. And Mussar helps us clue into these choice points, to recognize them, and to give us guidance to make a decision towards the good. We know from Pirkei Avot that a mitzvah leads to a mitzvah and a sin leads to another sin, and that's kind of part of this idea too, that we can shift that boundary back and forth through our Mussar practice. As part of my flavor of Mussar, I try to present a backstory so people with very little Jewish literacy can just jump right in and start doing a Mussar practice. I provide 4 assumptions for Mussar, which are: we all have a divine spark, but it's occluded by our baggage. So we all have free will, but it's not always accessible. We're driven by this conflict between the good and evil inclinations. And we all share the same soul traits, but have a unique measure of each. And at the start of each chapter, or at the start of each Mussar small group, we'll spend just a couple minutes digging into one of these assumptions. I want to share with you this idea about soul traits. So the Hebrew for this is midot, it means measure. And having too much of a soul trait is just as bad as having not enough. So this is what is a spider graph, something which I've created to create like a soul trait profile. So around, let's see, I think I can do a little annotation thing. Right, so can you see my arrow here? Yeah, so around the outside, you see 13 different soul traits. And on a scale of 1 to 10, you can rate yourself, where 1 is very little and 10 is very high. And you can plot this little graph. So for each of you fill out the survey, it creates this graph. And you'll notice this circle in the middle, that represents our divine spark. That's what we can all aspire to be, because that's that balance point. And only the divinity is in balance for all soul traits. And we can start to understand ourselves and see, where is it that I need to do some work? Okay, so any questions on the Mussar background, and if so far? Are people ready to jump in and start to experience it?
So just a side note here, if anyone has any questions, you can either type them into the chat box and we'll read them out, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and just ask them yourself.
Okay, great. So now we're going to together experience what it would be like to be doing some Mussar as part of a small group. And after a nosh and some time for schmoozing, people would all sit down. And we'll start with just a short meditation. So this is just going to be a minute or two. So I would like all of you, and this will help us become present, and it will also remind us of the it will also remind us of the breathe. Okay, so let's all close our eyes. Just settle into our chair. Taking a deep breath through the nose and hold for a minute, and then exhale through the mouth. And as you're slowly breathing, allow just a wave of relaxation to pass down through your body. Starting at the crown of the head, feel it traveling down past your eyes, down past your nose and mouth. Feel relaxation go through the neck and the shoulders, down the trunk of the body and down the arms, past the elbows and through the hands. Feel that relaxation crossing your waist, traveling down your legs past the knees, down the calves and through the ankles and across the ball of your foot. And on your next exhale, just exhale a little bit more fully, just to let that extra bit of stress just escape from your body. And on the next inhale, think to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. With Shema, we're listening deeply. We're listening without judgment and without offering advice. We're listening in confidence, and we're listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Now's the time when we'll check in on our Mussar practice. So if we're part of an ongoing group, we would share how the soul trait we've been working on has shown up in our lives. We would work on one soul trait at a time. Today we're going to be focusing on the soul trait of patience. But since this is our first time meeting, what we would normally do is we would check in with a relational question, where each person would talk for 1 to 2 minutes answering the question, and everyone else would practice sacred listening, not interrupting, not offering advice. Because we're on a recording that's going to be publicly available, we can't really keep the level of confidentiality necessary in order to do that sharing. But I will do a little bit of a share myself. I don't mind sharing my story, and I want to give you an idea of what this can look like. And so the question is, at what crossroads do you find yourself at this time in your life? It's a particularly important question during Pesach, as we are reminded that every year we have an opportunity for personal liberation. We can escape from our own, be liberated from our own Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word for Egypt, which also can mean a narrow place. And so for me, and I'm going to actually set a timer for a minute for myself, just so I can keep this short. For me, I'm at a very interesting crossroads. I discovered yesterday, I've been seeing some for some insomnia, discovered that I have a biological condition which makes it hard for my body to relax. And so if there's some kind of stress, my body takes it up to a 10. And when the blog post isn't done, I can start to feel like, oh my God, the world is ending. I haven't finished my blog post. And this is a tendency that I knew I had. It's something that I've been working on through the Mussar practice, but to understand that there's actually a biological reason behind that gives me really pause. And I need to think about, how do I incorporate that with kind of my ongoing spiritual practice, when I very much think of this as like Yetzer Hara run amok, the evil inclination run amok. And so I need to figure out how I can work on that in a way of better guiding it and planning my life. Okay, here's my timer, so that this doesn't take over. So that's the crossroads that I'm at. We're not going to share it, but I would like you to just think for a couple of minutes. If you have a piece of paper, we're just going to pause for a minute or so and just think about, what crossroads are you at this time in your life? Journaling is an important part of Mussar practice, so if you have something to write on, or just jot down a couple of words or a couple of sentences. What is it that you're looking to be liberated from? What are the choices that are in front of you? What is your crossroads? Might be something about your career. Maybe something about a relationship. Maybe it's how your career and your relationships, or your lack of relationships, come together. Maybe it's stage of life or age. I think we're all at a crossroads. I think we all have never met someone, when I asked this question, who didn't realize they were at some sort of crossroads in their life. Okay, so thank you all for taking that opportunity to look within a little bit. Now we're going to learn about the soul trait of patience. As I explained earlier, we have our 4 basic assumptions of our Mussar practice. And the one that I think is really key for the soul trait of patience is that there's a divine spark in everyone, but it's occluded by our baggage. Now, if you're unsure of the divinity, you can think about this as that common spark of humanity, that piece of goodness that we all have that no one can take away. No one can ever take this away from us. Now, Rabbi Akiba taught that we were given 2 great gifts by the divine. One is we were given the divine spark. We were created in the divine image. And we were told that we were created in the divine image. Well, why is this important? You can imagine a number of different interpretations, but the one that I particularly like is that it gives us something to live up to. It's like, wow, whatever I've done, whatever might be going on, I have a piece of the divine inside of me, which means I can always do better. I have everything I need to be whoever I want to be and to be my best self. Now, the thing that holds us back from that, of course, is our baggage. And what I mean by baggage is those hurts or those things that happen during life, which we call, which we accumulate and which causes us to react in certain ways. But the beauty of Mussar is it lets us move the bags. It lets us move the bags and let the light shine through. I'd love to hear your reaction to this teaching. Is this something that you can relate to? What does that bring up for you? Don't all speak at once.
I can respond. My impatience, to a great extent, is with people who overreact and don't listen, and it really stresses me.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in situations within my own synagogue board.
So lack of listening causes, what I'm hearing you say is that lack of listening, when other people aren't listening, that causes you to be impatient. Yeah. And so how might that, so I guess the question is, how might your perception of that situation change if you remembered that you have a divine spark, which can give you some tools to deal with that, and we'll cover that in a couple minutes, but also that they also have a divine spark. And underneath that bad behavior and that lack of listening, that they have a piece of the divinity too.
Well, my rational side prevailed, and I encouraged our board to accept the idea of having a URJ guided board workshop, and that is now a work in progress. So I am pleased about that.
Wonderful. So there is hope for the situation, right?
There's a great deal of hope, indeed.
There are a couple of comments in the chat box in response. One is from Alan Leader. It's powerful teaching, knowing that each day, each moment, we have the ability to change and be our best self. And then I wrote, I think related to the divine spark piece, I think I might be more patient if I can remember my kids have a divine spark in them.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Esther. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Alan, for sharing your comment as well. It is powerful. It's something which we don't often remember. And it's nice to have these little reminders.
Right. Carrie adds about baggage, powerful indeed. It's also helpful to recognize that if we acknowledge and recognize some of our baggage, we're more likely to be working on moving that aside. So I guess this idea of naming it and then
Great. I lost the last, can everyone hear me okay? I lost audio for the last part of that, Esther. I'm not sure if that was on.
I guess it's me. I guess the idea of naming it allows you to then, work on it. Like by recognizing it. That's what I learned from that message.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie.
If I
please.
It's not enough for me to recognize that I can be impatient, but I'm realizing, as we're talking about this, I need to kind of figure out why I have some blocks to my patience. What are some of the reasons that I get impatient? And if I can recognize that, maybe it'll help me the next time to work on being a little more patient or a little less impatient incrementally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will get into some of that later, because what Mussar offers is a framework and a structure to help us kind of systematically recognize where we're out of balance. So if we're out of balance for patients in a certain way, what are some of those situations? And then we can start to make some changes. But we don't try to boil the ocean. We aren't expected to suddenly become like the most patient person in the world, but we try to pick one area. What's one just slice of my life where I can try to be a little bit more patient for the next 2 weeks? So let's learn, what is patience. The soul trait, it comes, the Hebrew word is savlanut, and it really is, it's the ability to endure an unpleasant situation. You know, silvot, that's the Hebrew root. It's like to carry a burden. I think the guy who carries the luggage in Israel has there's a word like that. There's phrases in the Torah that God tells Moses to deliver the Israelites from their burden that they're carrying. So if, I'm not impatient in traffic, if it doesn't bother me to be stuck just sitting for 5 minutes and not moving, I don't need patience in that situation. But if it bothers me, patience is kind of like the gift of last resort. It's a gift that we have which can help us endure a difficult situation until it passes. One of the things we learn about Mussar is that all of these soul traits are on a spectrum, and so having too little is just as bad as having too much. So first of all, what's the consequence of having too little patience?
I think it sometimes for me results in reactive anger.
Absolutely. We get impatient, we get angry, we get frustrated.
Yeah, Carrie wrote something similar, quickness to anger. Quickness to anger, and then Heath wrote like dry brush, easily ignited.
And even
That's
if
right.
you don't explode,
okay, so
it'll make you really unhappy.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, well, what about, now Mussar is not a trait, is different, where it's like the object is not to have as much patience as possible. Because what happens if we have too much patience?
Too slow to change.
Be slow to change, yeah. So like, what's an example where someone might have been slow to change?
With
Well,
social justice and civil rights issues. If everybody was too patient, then nothing would change.
That's right. Well, we just kind of sit back and wait. Eventually they'll start giving the votes people. They'll start giving more equal rights to women, to LGBT community. These things will take care of themselves, right? No, they won't. We have to act.
Gail wrote, you can be run over by everybody and by events.
Yeah, absolutely. Gail, I'd love to hear more about what you mean by that. I don't know if you can either type more or unmute and tell us more about what that means. I mean, I can imagine the way that I process that is that I think about, maybe getting, okay. So Gail says, you're sitting there passively while things go around you and get out of the flow of events. Yeah, absolutely. Or other examples that I think of is maybe you're staying in a bad job. Maybe you're staying in a bad relationship, hoping that things are going to get better on their own. And some action is needed, either to leave the relationship or to try to work more actively on making the relationship work. But if we're just patient all the time, then we never take any action, and that's not good either. Okay, so now we're going to do a little interactive event. So, whoops, let's see, that didn't work right. So we can now do an annotation. What I'd like you to do is just to put where you think you are on the spectrum.
Up at the top of your screen, you should see a button that says Options. And if you click on that, you will see a button that says Annotate.
So I love you. I'm just going to get started. I'm just going to put like a little line where I think I am on the spectrum. Okay, yeah, let's see. Who else? You know, the beauty of this exercise and what we can see is there are no right or wrong answers, right? There is where you think you are on the spectrum. And it's a tool. Now, of course, part of the danger is if you ask people, and they've done these studies, are you an above average driver? Guess how many people say they're above average drivers? 95%. So while this is useful, and this tells us that, wow, there's really a spectrum, there's no right or wrong answer, we also have to remember that, you know, our initial perspectives may not be correct. In the very first class I was doing at Beth Am, we were working on patients, and we came back in, we did our check-in, and one of my friends came and he's like, wow, I went home and I told my wife we're working on patients, and I said to her, well, I'm a really patient person. And she said, no, you're not. So it's good. And as we go through this, we can use this as a data point. Okay, let's see. So we'll clear all of these. And now I need to figure out, okay, I think I need to figure out how to advance the slide. There we go. All right, so this is a reading from Heshbon HaNefesh. It's one of the classic Mussar books. It was published in 1845, translated as Accounting of the Soul. Someone read this out loud, please.
Sure, happy to do it. Woe to the pampered man who has never been trained to be patient. Either today or in the future he is destined to sip from the cup of affliction. Moreover, he is beset with vain regret like those unfortunate boors who are full of meaningful remorse, making statements like, had I only not entered that business, this would have never occurred.
Okay, so this was written in 1845. Can anyone relate to this? Does this sound... people internally have not changed from where we were 160 years ago. So we're going to take this opportunity now to do some Hebruta study. And so what's going to happen is Clara is going to split us up into groups. And I think we're going to put these questions in the chat box. And so what I'd like you to do is with your Hebruta, with your study partner, I'd like you each to take turns and first of all talk about what is the danger for someone who's trained not to be patient, and then to share a time from your own life when you weren't as patient as you could have been. You know, what was the impact on you and other people, and what might have been better if you had been able to tap into the soul trait of patience. Maybe if you've been able to tap your divine spark and be a little bit more patient. So we'll just pause for about 5 minutes to let you have these discussions, and then we will come back together.
So Greg, just so I'm clear, we're talking about what's the danger of not being trained to be patient.
Yes, from the reading, what's the danger that Rabbi Levin is telling us about? And then how did this relate to you? So this is from a Mussar parenting curriculum. So if you're a parent, you can talk about a time when you weren't patient as a parent, and what was the impact on you and the rest of the family, and how might it have been different? These should be confidential discussions. So we are going to come back together and have an opportunity to share, but only share if you wish to, and only share something you realized about yourself, not something that your partner told you. Okay?
And to be clear, we will not be recording the breakout sessions.
Okay.
Okay, we've got some people moving.
So it's all under the
little.
keep of silence.
Greg, can I do a group of 3? Does that work for you?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so you are about to be moved into another group. You will have to press a button to accept it. You may be muted on the other end, so just be aware. Enjoy.
Recording again, by the way?
I can be. If you want me to hold off on recording again, I can pause again.
No, I'd record. I think we're okay.
Okay.
Right. So hi, we're back. We are recording again, but does anyone want to share kind of what the experience was like of doing this reflective exercise in Heverutah? Did you learn anything about yourself or maybe come up with any insights?
I think that I realized that the very fact of doing Mussar, which requires practice, makes you develop some self-insight.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, this is a very active, it's a very active practice. It's something that we do, but the insights can come pretty quickly. I mean, some of us here on this call maybe have never tried Mussar at all, and I have sensed from the chat comments and the discussion that people are already having insights.
It's
Anyone else have
in your normal life that you aren't self-reflective very often. You're much more reactive. At least I am.
Yeah.
And less often self-reflective. You're always active and thinking and doing, and not so much pausing and reflecting.
And so how has it been to pause and reflect for a couple minutes here in community?
It's good to have the time to do that. I think that part of the whole idea of Mussar is you're setting aside the time to actually intentionally do something that otherwise you would blow right through because you were too busy with all the things that one is busy with and never actually being self-reflective. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, and I see from Karen Sirota, she wrote in the chat box, honest study and conversations create connections. Yeah, absolutely. Do other people feel that? Do you feel like maybe you know the person, you know, do you feel any level of, anyone else feel a level of connection with their Heverutah? I see Carrie Leaf wrote, it helps to focus on a specific example and talk it through with someone else. At least the next time the situation occurs, the awareness. At the best, the reactions will be better than before the conversation. And yes, RE, the level of connection. Yes, I agree. You move quickly toward an I vow relationship to interact with people thoughtfully. Absolutely wonderful. Very, you know, it's interesting that we're all relating to this in a very Jewish way. It is a Jewish teaching, but it's not this sort of deep text stuff. It's more of a heart space experience where we have a little bit of text to guide us, but it's really a guide, and it's a guide to help open our hearts to both ourselves and to other people. There's something very intimate about sharing in Heverutah. Absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen again. And now for this next section, I'm just going to give you a flavor. We're not really going to go through these, but if we were a group and we were continuing, like after this learning about patience, we would be transitioning to practicing patience. So there are specific examples. This is something that someone brought up in the very beginning. Well, what are some things that I can do?
So maybe you want to emulate someone who's patient. Maybe we realize we're emulating God, and if you're not sure about God, you could think of it as, again, that divine spark, or emulating the best elements of humanity. Here's another story that if the facilitator wished, they could read. This is about someone who decided to turn down a promotion. And so this could be another example of maybe practicing patience. That's not a lot of people turn down promotions these days. And so it's an interesting read. There's some additional teachings on patience. And then we would move to the final step, which is my next step. Because while we're doing Mussar together in community, it's also something that we carry with us through everyday life. So we could all take a look at what are some personal practices we can do around patience, like what we did before, we're understanding where do I sit along the spectrum? How does my patience balance come into play in my parenting? And then the most important question is, what's one small action that I can take to move towards balance? Like, for example, one of my students, and I think I share this example in the book, she was a curse you out, cut you off driver. And she said, okay, to be more patient, I'm going to let everybody merge in front of me. And she came in 2 weeks later and said, wow, I'm like the calmest driver in California now. It was really an amazing. And she said, now my ride is like this pleasant. I listen to music. I'm not cussing people out. It's not stressful anymore. And so that's just one small change that makes that situation better. And it also changes our soul and helps us be more patient in other situations. And again, there's some additional suggestions for how we might practice patience. And then some final thoughts. Okay, so now we're going to move towards deconstructing this experience. And what I mean by that is we're going to kind of go behind the curtain, and I will let you know how I facilitated this. Now, I could jump into that right away, but before I do, does anyone have any questions or comments as we transition into that section? Okay, I will transition away then. As I mentioned earlier, so this would be part of a small groups meeting. So stages of a meeting, again, I would suggest we start with the schmooze and the nosh. And then during the meditation, you'll notice that I said things like we listen with an open heart, we don't judge, we keep it confidential. This is my way of reminding us of the brief. We could also, the agreement that we have for the conduct of the meeting, that could also be read more explicitly. But this is kind of the time where there's the meditation, the breathe, and the sharing. And then the next sections are learning, practicing, and then my next step. And kind of similar to the way I designed the criteria, I modeled it a little bit on aspect questions. These were all implicitly part of the Mussar groups that I created. But I wanted to sort of create these distinct stages and to remind people that they have an opportunity to just bring this into their everyday life as well. So each participant would have a handout. So each handout would have 4 slides on it. And this gives the facilitator the ability to kind of jump around and move to different pieces of material based in part on their pre-planning, what they think is most important to cover. And so just based on the flow of the conversation, you might think it's going to kind of go in one direction, but then someone brings something up which takes it in another direction. In general, there's usually about 16 slides worth of material, and maybe 6 or 7 or 10 get covered in a given group. But which ones is going to vary kind of depending on what the facilitator chooses to do. Now, the facilitator has a separate guide, and for each of the slides, there is, and this is a screenshot from the facilitator's guide. So on the left, You can see, can people see my arrow here?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So on the left, again, here's the slide. So we followed this, we did this divine spark assumption. And then you'll see over here, there's a note talking about share Rabbi Akiva's teaching. This is a teaching which is in the book, but this is also just the facilitator doesn't need to read and study the book to kind of figure out exactly what to do. This is sort of a handy guide that they can use to prepare and then facilitate. So the as I've just alluded to, this curriculum does come out of my book, The Spiritual Practice of Good Actions, and it kind of brings things full circle because it started as a Mussar class. I just decided I wanted to teach Mussar, and then I decided I needed to learn Mussar, and the synagogue was very supportive in helping me do that. I kind of pulled all this stuff together. I created the class, and we said we're going to meet 5 times. And then everybody said, let's keep going, let's keep going. So it grew over the course of a few years into 13 distinct soul traits. I wrote the book based on the class, and now I'm kind of taking the book and moving that into a curriculum so that anyone can facilitate and lead Mussar groups. So the book is suggested, but it wouldn't be required for everyone in the group. Now, the top priority of the book is I really wanted to make Mussar accessible. And I was very moved by the Pew study a few years ago and all of our Jewish brothers and sisters wandering in the wilderness, liking being Jewish, but not really feeling connected to the Jewish community. And I said, but they like being Mussar, they like Jewish, or they like being Jewish, they like Jewish values. And so I said, Mussar could be a great way for people to connect. So I tried to make it as accessible as possible. You won't see any Hebrew terms. I provide the alternatives to God talk. But at the same time, it's rigorously sourced so that people can continue their Jewish journey and they can go read the original sources in the Talmud if they wish. Now, in terms of the curriculum, my top priority was to make something that a lay leader could use to facilitate a Mussar group with just a few hours of training. I mean, there are other Mussar curricula where you need to take like a 4-month course in order to facilitate it. I wanted to take, again, I was modeling on Ask Big Questions, where if you have someone with some basic level of sensitivity, that they could have some materials that they could use just to get going right away. I mean, I don't think there's anything bad that can happen. You know, it's not like you need to know lots of stuff or lots of backstory to do Mussar. I certainly did not when I started. And we also have a matching set of mantra cards. So let me pause here, and maybe it would have been better to pause actually before I talked about the curriculum, but are there any questions about kind of what we went through today about Mussar? I'm very open to feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like. I'll open up the floor.
I do have a question.
Look, I see you there with an assistant.
My rabbi has just begun teaching members of the congregation, and we have even begun to do an introduction to Mussar with the parents of our religious school students.
Wonderful.
And we are looking at incorporating some study of Mussar practice into our confirmation curriculum as we go forward. Is there something that you have prepared or some of your Mussar teacher colleagues have prepared that's really designed for 13 through 16-year-olds?
So I have not prepared anything for 13 through 16-year-olds. The curriculum that I've prepared is for parents, for just general Mussar work, or also for a focus on interfaith couples, or like the non-Jewish partner, Jewish spouse.
Okay.
There is, the Mussar Institute has curriculum for kids and for teens. I think Mussar is wonderful for people of all ages. I've seen, but it's not, doing stuff for kids is not my particular strength. I will let people who are better, have that kind of skill set to prepare those materials. But I would definitely encourage you to check with the Mussar Institute and Mussar Institute website, or just Google Mussar for Teens, or Mussar Curriculum for Teens.
Thank you for sharing that information. I do appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Lynn.
Is Claire on the phone?
Yes.
Claire, this is Ken Sigmund.
I can. How are you?
I intended to stay on the whole time. I have some clients that came in, and I've got to kind of be with them for a good part of this. So, but maybe there's some offline that we can kind of talk about, so I can get some download. But
sure.
My clients came in, and so I'm just wanted to apologize because I planned to be on there the whole time.
Not a problem, Ken. Thanks for joining us, and I can send you the links when the recording is uploaded.
Super. Thank you so much.
No problem. Take care.
And Ken, also, this is Greg. You feel free to follow up with me if you any questions.
Yeah, I would like the contact information. I really would.
I'll email it to you afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Because I take over in June, so this will be good information for me.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ken. So again, I think the good news about Mussar is that each and every one of us has what it takes to be a mensch. And I think each and every one of our institutions has the ability to create a mensch factory, to give our congregants, our fellow congregants, our members, an opportunity to connect with Judaism in a way that perhaps they didn't previously. Can you see how I'd be curious to hear, could you see how Mussar, do you think that this could work as part of a small groups curriculum? I've led my own, or maybe Mussar, aside from this particular curriculum, but can you see Mussar working for small groups?
I definitely can, certainly as a result of our rabbi introducing Mussar to our congregation as part of an education collaborative this past season. And even though the collaborative was over, several of us have decided to continue to study on an ongoing basis. So absolutely I do. I appreciate the opportunity to participate today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We
so
currently have a small group that was formed of many small groups that we have that has been very, very successful. Uses a quote-unquote professional Mussar teacher who's hired to provide the guidance for the group. And so it's interesting the alternative between training and lay-led versus bringing in professional and the benefits of the pros and cons of doing that. Obviously, we have one class with a professional. We're not going to have 10 classes with 10 professionals, or at least I can't imagine doing that because it'd be hard to find those 10 professionals. But I could imagine more groups if one used lay-led. What can you say about the pros and cons on that?
Yeah, so, I think part of it is really a matter of philosophy. Like you can look at an organization like IACA, which has a very rigorous training program, and their philosophy, and the Mussar Institute is similar in that, this is complicated stuff and you want to be really sensitive to everybody's needs. You want to kind of go in and be prepared, and there's kind of a right way to do this, and we really want everyone to take that approach. Then there's what I call the ask big questions approach, which for those of us who were in Dallas in November, it's like, here's some materials, you bring people together, and they're going to interact with the materials how they interact with them. I mean, when I started Mussar, I was completely self-taught. You know, I was 2 months ahead of the rest of the class. I was reading furiously up until, you know, the night before as I was putting these slides together. And my philosophy is, what's the worst thing that can happen if people are sitting around talking about Jewish materials? You know, I just don't. And I feel like we want to get this as widely out there as possible. Part of my experience in the corporate world, when I was a product manager for very technical products, is we had trained support staff, and we found that as the company got bigger, we could not get enough trained support people to handhold customers, and we had to build more resilient products, which required less support. And so part of my bias is, you know, just let people go and run with it, but other people will behave differently. That makes sense to you, Chuck?
Yes, absolutely. It's really, actually, I like the way you brought in Yeka and Mussar Institute and Ask Big Questions, because that really puts a nice frame around the different approaches and ways of looking at this. I remember when we were first talking about Mussar in our synagogue.
Sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
I was going to say, when we first talked about Mussar in our synagogue, and I was talking with our senior rabbi, and he said, well, I think Mussar is great, but we really need to make sure it's the right person with the right training who's teaching it. I don't know if he still thinks that. I just remember that was sort of this initial reaction was, this is very sensitive. You need to have just to make it, to build it right, you have to have the right person at it. And yet I like the Ask Big Questions approach, where you form small groups that can make serious conversation and do serious Jewish work together.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm a member of the Mussar Institute. I've gotten a lot of my training there. I'm a big fan. But I also know in the early days, they were trained by Ayeka. And Ayeka actually trained them to do. So I actually don't think it's a coincidence. And they're, you know, they do a wonderful, they're directly aligned with the modern Orthodox community. And so I think they have a bit more of a sensibility towards there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And it's perfectly legitimate sensibility, but it's just not my sensibility. That I think, yes, there are wrong ways you can do it, but, you know, to get into the wrong way, you need to start bringing Jesus in. You know, that's out of bounds for me. Most other things are in bounds.
Greg, we also have a question from Gail about the mantra cards. She's asking if they are phrases to be recited for each soul trait.
Yeah. So you may have noticed, if we go all the way back to this slide, for patience, there's a mantra. It's "This too shall pass, and I have the strength to get by until it does." So when we're doing Mussar practice on our own, you would write down the mantra on an index card, or I have like some really nice graphically designed cards which show the spectrum and the mantra. So you can just take that and put it on your bed table, and then you would say it over and over again throughout the, you know, for like 2 minutes. You could sing it, you can chant it, but it helps frame your day. So it's kind of an optional thing that people can do. Oh, there was also a question that came in asking what Ayeka is. Ayeka is an organization out of Israel, which is I hope I could describe this well, but they're really into, they have a great methodology for doing Jewish conversations based on just a little bit of text study. And so they have a very definite methodology that they use.
Right.
And they have a curriculum that they sell.
I'll just add Ayaka's also has the language of being soul based, and if you want to, if you go Google Ayaka, I mean, you'll find their website. But you can also Aryeh Ben David, who founded Ayaka, who's a Jewish educator. Yeah, they're based in Jerusalem. He wrote a book that was published by Jewish Lights before it moved. So if you look under Jewish Lights, Ayaka, you'll find his book, which kind of highlights the methodology. And they also go into congregations and train people. Great. Yes. Clara just posted their website, and I'm going to, Aryeh Ben David is the person who wrote the book. They also have something called Becoming a Soulful Parent curriculum, which we can connect you to. Anyway, so they're just another place. Yeah.
Oh, I thought of one more thing in answer to Chuck's question as well. I know that Larchmont Temple has, I think, 6 Mussar groups, and I believe that Rabbi Bethy Miller just trained, they had a general facilitators training, and then she had like an additional training for the Mussar facilitators. So there was, again, that was one of the things that told me, and she said that seemed to be working pretty well. And she put the materials together herself that they're using. So that told me, okay, this is a model that can really work in a small groups context.
Yeah.
So let me just share.
Yes. How do we get your curriculum?
Right. Okay. So here's just a little bit more detail. So the Mussar Parenting, and Mussar for Non-Jews curriculum, they'll be available in September. And so what you'll get is materials for 13 soul traits, which are based on the 13 soul traits in the book. And for the parenting curriculum, there's an additional one, which is strength, Gevurah, which I think if anyone's a parent, they know exactly why you need to focus on that. And so each soul trait will come with a handout and a matching facilitator's guide. Also, as part of the package of the 2 webinars, which should be like a 2 to 3 hour training, and then an additional webinar, which can be either additional training or it could be content directly for people who are in the small groups. I'll provide email support for facilitators, and each facilitator will also get a free copy of the book. And while the book is recommended, it's not required for participants. Also, this is a full ownership model. So you buy the curriculum, you can use it forever for as many people as you want. It's not like a per person sort of model or a yearly lease. It's kind of, you buy it, you get it, you can use it. And so then the cost for all of this for a set of the materials is $1,500. Now, if this is something that is of interest to you, I can provide, if you want to kind of dig into this a little bit more, I'll give Clara and Esther, if you're interested, let me know and I will send you the sample patient's curriculum, the facilitator's guide, and the handout that you can take a look at and decide if that is of interest.
Gail says that her synagogue is definitely interested in the curriculum.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you all so much for being here today. And if you like, I often close with just a short kind of closing meditation, which we can do for a minute. Would people like to do that?
Yes, I would.
Okay, great. So once more, close your eyes. Taking a deep breath and hold, and then exhale. Tilt your head up just a little bit and allow your face to come into a smile. And let's just together take a moment of gratitude. Let's be grateful for the people in our lives. Let's be grateful for our community. Can I have a moment of gratitude that we were for our Judaism and all of the wisdom that it has to offer us. And let's be grateful for this opportunity that we had just to take a small moment of pause in our very busy lives. At this point, I would ring a bell, but I forgot to bring it with me for the webinar. So, ding. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Greg. I just want to say thank you to Greg for offering to teach and sharing us this material. I found it very personally useful, and also I find it very professionally meaningful. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you to everybody else for joining us. This was a great way to spend at least an afternoon in my day, maybe the morning or earlier afternoon for some of you. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.